Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be in Helsinki for the first time ever. I've been in the area of employee engagement and cultural research and employee research for about 20 years now. And one of the particular areas of interest for me is around organizational culture and change. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So clearly, the ability to change for organizations in a purposeful way is the key to future survival, posterity for organizations. Billions and billions of dollars are spent every year on organizations looking to manage change of all types. But what I'm talking about today is not the nuts and bolts of change management. I'm talking about people. I'm talking about behavior and involvement of people and the measurement and insight. What I'm talking about essentially is culture. So in this presentation, I want you to introduce you to the concept of something called behavior memes. They provide a whole new framework for understanding, for measuring, and for changing organizational culture. I only have 25 minutes, so it's going to be a fairly brief overview. But obviously, I'll be here for some time today, and I'll be at the Questback lounge area. So if after this presentation you have some more questions, please do feel free to come and visit us, and we can give you some more background. So, first of all, in terms of change, we need to recognize that organizations have a particularly poor track record when it comes to change. In fact, we're positively crap at it. And McKinsey have very helpfully quantified exactly how crap, and they estimate that around 30% return on investment is achieved on average by organizations going through a change management program. Now, given the millions and millions and millions of dollars that are invested every year in this activity, that's a pretty poor return, I hope you'll agree. It's a prime example of culture eating strategy for breakfast. Why do this ROI so poor? It's because of people, and it's because of culture. And here are the 5 reasons that they give for this poor success rate. First of all, we focus on the systems, not people. We tend to focus on the nuts and bolts of the change without consideration of the culture and what we actually want our people to do differently. We fail to pay attention to whether or not people understand in real terms what it is they actually have to do differently, or to stop doing, or to do more of, or to do less of. We tend to assume that people understand what we need them to do, but in reality, do they really? I was recently involved in a values program rollout with a large bank in the UK. And from their employee engagement survey, 95% of people said that they understood what the values meant for them. Pretty high, pretty good, yeah? What we did was we followed that up with a telephone survey. We caught people cold. And we did a sample survey which discovered that 15% of people, that's 1/5, could actually tell us what those value statements were. So we got quite a gap there. Then, of course, once we've got people to understand what we want them to do, we need to motivate them to contribute. We need to involve them actively in the process of change. And there's a very common misconception around change, is that change has to come solely from the top. It does have to come from the top, but it has to come from every level within your organization. If it doesn't involve everybody in an active way, it is not going to be successful. And the final thing is that we need an understanding of the progress of the change process. We need to understand on an ongoing way, through the change program, what is working, what is not working, where there is best practice, so that we can share it. And so that we can make real-time course corrections based on that real-time information coming in. Now, in terms of culture, culture is at the root of this. And there are a number of cultural models out there, and they're designed to help us understand what our cultures look like. And the models tend to look something like this. What I'm not talking about now are employee engagement surveys. Employee engagement surveys are not culture surveys. They are not very good at getting at culture. In fact, they can be positively misleading. Unfortunately, engagement and culture tend to be interchangeable these days, and even some companies dealing in employee engagement surveys have culture in their name. But don't get confused and don't get fooled, and I'll explain why and how they're different a little bit later. So here is a typical model of culture. They're developed by assessment psychologists. They're based on psychometric principles. They're quite complex with a large number of attributes. They usually require specialist training and accreditation to administer and interpret. But what time-poor leaders and managers and staff want and need is a clear, comprehensive understanding of what they need to do to help the aims of the change program in terms of real, tangible behaviors. And we never look to change a whole culture. Why would we need to understand a whole culture in all of its entirety? When we're looking at culture change, we're focusing on specific areas, be it innovation, be it inclusion, be it risk. We're looking at maximum one or two of these individual indices at a time. And what many of our time-poor managers and employees across the business see when they look at models like this is that. Or worse still, what they see is that. Hardly a good starting point for getting people behind the process, getting them motivated, and getting them involved. And when you start distributing the results to these kinds of models, you hear heads banging on desks going, but what do you want me to actually do? And that's a very, very important question. So in terms of culture and culture change, what do we need to succeed? Surely, if we need to change the culture, we need to understand clearly how cultures come into existence and how they're sustained. We need to understand the mechanism behind the propagation and maintenance of culture. If we can understand this mechanism, then we can use it to inform how we change the culture and overcome the barriers that McKinsey have identified. So we need clarity, we need alignment, we need involvement, we need actionable insight, and we need to track the progress. Why am I showing you this? Not because it's particularly illuminating about organizational culture. Well, maybe you could argue it is. But it is, of course, an example of a meme. Memes are usually videos or graphics posted online. You all know what they are. This term is now in common parlance, but the original meaning of the word meme was very, very different and predated the internet by quite some considerable time. And memes were first described by Professor Richard Dawkins in his book, The Selfish Gene, which I'm sure many of you will have read. And memes are the fundamental building blocks of culture. They're analogous to genes in that they carry information, they're transmitted from person to person, they're stable but they can mutate, but they convey an adaptive advantage or a disadvantage to their hosts. And they're a fundamental and very powerful mechanism through which cultures are formed and reinforced. And they've given rise to a whole new area of study called memetics, which some of you may be familiar with. Here is another quote from Dawkins. The important point here is that memes largely operate at an unconscious level. So hosts are not aware of the extent to which memes are exerting a powerful influence over their behavior. And the worrying thing here is that memes neither have regard for or are necessarily aligned to your cultural aspirations for change. In fact, they're very often in conflict with it. Amazingly, so it could be quite likely that these really powerful things which are affecting your people's behavior are pushing them directly in the opposite direction from the one you wish them to go, and neither they or you are aware of the effect that they're having. And this, when you're looking for purposeful directional change, is a serious problem. I hope you'll agree. Amazingly, the concept of memes has yet to be applied to the area of assessment and management of organizational culture until now. And it opens up a whole new practical way of understanding and managing organizational cultures, as I have said, and a mechanism for changing them. So, let's have a look at a killer behavioral meme. Excuse me. What we're talking about here, in terms of culture, is behavior, the way we do things around here, with emphasis on the word do. And what underpins this are what we call behavior memes. Essentially, this is important. This is the important bit. Behavior memes are the collective assumed consequences of specific behaviors. They're shared across a large number of people within the organization, and effectively they say, if I do this, or if we do this, this will happen. Action, consequence. Action, consequence. When it becomes shared across a large number of people, it comes to define a key aspect of culture. So here is an example. Here is a new person just joined an organization. Their ears are open, their antennae are up, and they're looking for the best way to proceed within the organization in terms of succeeding. So if I want to get ahead here, what should I do? Here are two possible ways of proceeding. First of all, do what I can to fit in. Secondly, do what I can to stand out. These are pretty fundamental questions, and they get asked usually, not always, but usually at an unconscious level. So, where do people usually fall? They usually want to fit in, right? It makes sense, it's much less risky, and it's much more likely to serve them well, particularly in top-down management cultures. All understandable, all quite natural and normal. Yes, I hope you agree. Until we start looking at it through the cultural lens and the lens of cultural change. If we want to develop a culture of innovation, for example, is this what we want? Absolutely not. We want the latter. We want people to speak up, we want people to challenge things, contribute new ideas, take some measured risks to do things differently. What about if we want a diverse, inclusive culture? We want people to stand out. We want people to bring their whole selves to the party. We want them to contribute in a new and different sense and bring their unique abilities to bear. So in this example, there is something normal and quite natural and understandable, but it's actually pulling us in the wrong direction in terms of desired culture change. So in this case, we have a very powerful, often unconscious meme, which is pushing people in the direction that we don't want them to go in. And once these memes take root, they are quite difficult to change. They become embedded. Unless we can bring these up into the collective consciousness, then we can challenge them, then we can discuss them, and then we can start changing them. And this is at the root of the methodology that we've developed. So, if these collective assumptions about the consequences of behavior can be challenged in a consistent and persistent way, in such that we reframe those assumptions in a permanent way, then we have changed culture. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, but it gives us a very clear and focused and targeted way to approach the problem of culture change. Here are some more examples, specifically around the area of change. So, killer memes in terms of people going through change. One here, if I keep my head down and just wait a bit, this whole change thing will go away, they'll move on to the next one, and then we can all go back to normal. Or if I come up with a new idea, maybe I'll be ridiculed for it, maybe it won't be accepted. It's a risky thing to do, yeah? And if I get involved, I'm not needed. It's being run from head office. This is not something I can get actively involved in. And finally, in terms of people's resilience through change, I know things are going to be tough, but if I speak up and tell people about the negative effect it's having on me, I'll be labeled a troublemaker. So these are the kinds of things that we directly need to challenge. So, for example, can I get involved? Absolutely. Should I get up and be involved? Absolutely we should, and we should be changing. Can I be involved? Yes, of course I can. Can I contribute ideas? That is actively required of you. Similarly, is your active participation. This is not something being driven from head office purely. This is something that involves and is expected to involve you and your team members. And can I talk about the negative impacts it's having on me personally? Absolutely, yes, you can. So when you identify what these memes are, you can directly challenge them and start talking about them, and they give you a real focus in your conversations with your people. So why focus on memes? Because they're simple. They're a simple mechanism that everyone can understand. They're rooted in behaviors, which gives you a real tangible framework through which to look at them, and they involve everyone in the conversation and the involvement in change. Finally, before I leave you, I want you to give you a real-world example of some research we've done which show the importance of memes in action. This is based on some research we conducted earlier this year with an investment bank. Now, following the financial crash, there was a lot of soul-searching around the role that toxic masculine cultures had played in the financial crash and how that led up to it. And also, we were looking into the areas of gender inclusion and diversity as well, and the gender pay gap. So what we did was we gave respondents a list of leadership-related traits and adjectives. And we said, to which extent do you see these traits being valued and rewarded within your organization? And they ranked those from most valued to least valued, from confidence and assertiveness down to modest. We then said, to which extent do you generally, bearing in mind that these traits can be exhibited by men and women equally, which do you naturally associate with masculinity and femininity and gender neutrality? And when we plotted value against masculinity, femininity, we found this pattern. A really clear association between value and masculinity. Effectively, what people were telling us is what this organization values and rewards in the decisions it makes about people is the masculine stuff. And the feminine stuff, like empathy, compassion, and nurturing, really doesn't feature. Okay, so what are the memes at work here? The memes at work here are, if I want to get ahead here within this organization, whether I'm a man or a woman or whoever, if I major on those confidence, assertiveness, those masculine things, I'm much more likely to succeed than if I show how empathic and compassionate and nurturing I am. Similarly, if I'm someone making a talent management decision, be it about hiring or performance management or promotions, for example, I'd be best to focus on those masculine things because that's what the organization's looking for, isn't it? So these kind of memes are really powerful in driving decisions that people make about people in their careers, and also the decisions that people make about their own careers. And the interesting thing about this result was that we asked these same people to what extent they believed that their organization was committed to equality of opportunity based on gender. And 85% of people said, oh, absolutely. We're an equal opportunities employer. But then, when they answered this question, they emphatically said, oh, yes, but we focus on the masculine stuff. That's what's important. This is one of the reasons that employee engagement surveys are really rubbish at getting at culture, because they don't get below that conscious surface. They don't dig deeper than people's experience and people's attitudes. And when you do that, you find there's a very different story unfolding. The other important thing here is that in employee engagement surveys, we want people to tell us everything's good. Yeah? And strongly agree response is a good response, isn't it? Generally, yes. When we look at culture, the reason we look at culture is because we want to instigate culture change. If everybody tells us everything is great, where is the motivation, the incentive to change? Change requires that you have an issue with the status quo. And actually, if everyone tells us everything is hunky-dory, that's the opposite of the actual result that we're looking for or that we want. And related to that, here is the result of a similar survey that we did within the NHS in the UK, UK's largest employer. And what you'll see is the relationship between masculinity and femininity, very, very similar, not quite so nicely packed around that axis, but nevertheless still telling us that we're majoring, focusing on the masculine stuff. There was a third part to the equation, and we said, for this organization to succeed at the highest possible level, what should we be valuing and rewarding? And in the NHS, the respondents said like this: a much more balanced profile. So things like compassion, empathy, nurturing come right up. Not surprising, given it's a healthcare organization, and that's its raison d'etre, but things like competitiveness and assertiveness dropping off a cliff. So what we have here is a big, shared, consistent appetite for change. Back to the investment bank. We asked them the same question. If we're to succeed as an organization in future, what should we be valuing and rewarding? And they told us this. Essentially, very, very a little difference from the current situation. So what they were telling us here emphatically and clearly is that we value the masculine stuff, and that's absolutely okay. In this scenario, what's going to change? Who's going to change unless you challenge these underlying assumptions and debate them? You have a cat in hell's chance of changing the culture within an organization like this with this profile. So I'm going to finish there. I've got 52 seconds. As I said, if you want to come and discuss any of the issues I've been talking about, please do feel free. Come and visit me or my colleagues at the Questback stand. In the interim, thank you very much for listening. Thank you.